Marcus Chen had been working as a cargo handler on the remote mining station Kepler 442b when the Zephyrian raiders attacked. The blue-skinned aliens with their crystalline armor and energy weapons had swept through the human settlement like a storm, capturing anyone they deemed useful. Marcus found himself shoved into a cramped holding cell with dozens of other humans, all destined for the slave markets of the Outer Rim. The journey to the Zephyrian homeworld took 3 weeks. During that time, Marcus learned that their captors viewed humans as nothing more than exotic pets or entertainment. The Zephyrians had never encountered humans before, and they found human resilience and adaptability amusing rather than threatening. They poked and prodded their captives, speaking in their musical language while pointing and laughing. When they finally arrived at Zephyr Prime, Marcus was separated from the other prisoners. A tall Zephyrian with intricate silver markings on his blue skin examined him like a piece of merchandise. This was Commander Vextar, one of the most influential nobles in Zephyrian society. He owned vast entertainment complexes across the galaxy, including the infamous dragon arenas where captured beings fought massive predators for the amusement of paying crowds. "This one has an interesting bone structure," Vextar said in accented standard, his voice like wind chimes. "The muscle density is adequate, though primitive. Yes, I think our patrons will find this creature's death quite entertaining." Marcus was dragged through the sprawling city of crystal spires and floating platforms. The Zephyrian capital was beautiful in an alien way, with buildings that sang in harmonious tones as the wind passed through them. But Marcus barely noticed the architecture. His mind was focused on survival, analyzing every detail of his surroundings for potential escape routes or weapons. The Dragon Arena was a massive amphitheater carved from a single piece of black stone. Thousands of seats rose in concentric circles around a central pit that was easily 200 meters across. As Marcus was led through the tunnels beneath the arena, he could hear the roar of the crowd above and the terrifying sounds of massive creatures echoing through the stone corridors. "The human will fight in tonight's main event," Vextar announced to his staff. "Make sure the cameras capture every moment. I want close-ups when the Shadow Maw tears him apart. Our viewers love to see the fear in their eyes." Marcus was thrown into a preparation cell with basic armor that looked like it had been cobbled together from scrap metal. The chest piece was dented, the arm guards were mismatched, and the helmet had a crack running down one side. A rusty sword lay on the floor beside the armor, its edge chipped and dull. It was clear that the Zephyrians didn't expect their entertainment to last very long. As evening approached, the noise from the crowd above grew louder. Marcus could hear the announcer's voice booming through speakers, though he couldn't understand the words. The excitement in the alien voices was unmistakable. They were hungry for blood and spectacle. 2 Zephyrian guards came to escort Marcus to the arena floor. They wore energy shields and carried plasma rifles, treating him like a dangerous animal even though they expected him to die within minutes. As they walked through the tunnel, Marcus could see other cells containing various alien creatures, all looking defeated and terrified. "You know," Marcus said conversationally to his guards, "where I come from, we have stories about people like you, beings who think they're superior, who treat others as disposable entertainment. Those stories never end well for the oppressors." The guards laughed, their voices tinkling like broken glass. "Your species will be extinct within a generation," one of them said. "Enjoy your last few minutes of existence, primitive." The tunnel opened onto the arena floor, and Marcus was temporarily blinded by the brilliant lights. When his vision cleared, he could see the massive crowd of Zephyrians filling every seat. Their blue skin gleamed under the lights, and their crystalline jewelry caught and refracted the illumination into dancing rainbows. They cheered and jeered as Marcus emerged, some throwing objects down into the pit. At the center of the arena floor, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. Scattered across the sand were bones, lots of bones. Some were clearly from species he didn't recognize, but others looked disturbingly familiar. Human bones. He wasn't the first of his kind to be thrown into this nightmare. The announcer's voice boomed across the arena, and while Marcus couldn't understand the words, the tone was clear. He was being introduced as the evening's entertainment, a primitive creature from a backward world who would provide amusing sport for the sophisticated Zephyrian audience. As the announcement ended, a section of the arena wall began to rise with a grinding mechanical sound. From the darkness beyond came a low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through Marcus's bones. The crowd fell silent in anticipation. What emerged from the tunnel was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. The Shadow Maw stood nearly 4 meters tall at the shoulder, its body covered in midnight black scales that seemed to absorb light. 6 legs ended in claws the size of swords, and its elongated head featured rows of teeth like crystalline daggers. Most terrifying of all were its eyes, pure white orbs that seemed to glow with their own internal light. The creature moved with surprising grace for something so massive, its movements fluid and predatory. It had clearly done this many times before. The Shadow Maw circled the arena's perimeter, letting its presence intimidate its prey before moving in for the kill. The crowd roared its approval. Marcus hefted his pathetic excuse for a sword and tried to think. Everything about this situation was designed to ensure his death. The weapon was barely functional. The armor was more decoration than protection, and his opponent was a perfectly evolved killing machine. But Marcus had something that none of the previous victims possessed. He was human. Humans had clawed their way to the top of Earth's food chain, not through superior strength or speed, but through intelligence, adaptability, and sheer stubborn refusal to give up. Marcus's ancestors had faced cave bears and saber-toothed cats with nothing but stone tools and teamwork. They had survived ice ages, plagues, and countless wars. The same blood that had carried his species from the African savanna to the stars now flowed through his veins. The Shadow Maw finished its circuit and turned its attention to Marcus. It lowered its head and let out a roar that shook dust from the arena walls. The crowd cheered louder, sensing that the killing was about to begin. But instead of cowering or charging recklessly forward, Marcus did something unexpected. He stood perfectly still and began to speak. "I know you can understand me," he said calmly, his voice somehow carrying across the arena despite the crowd's noise. "I can see the intelligence in your eyes. You're not just a mindless predator. You're a prisoner here, just like I am." The Shadow Maw paused, its head tilting slightly as if confused by this reaction. Previous victims had either frozen in terror or attacked in desperation. None had ever spoken to it as an equal. Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. "How many have you killed for their entertainment? How many innocent beings have died in this pit while they cheered? You're not a monster, you're a slave, and I think you're tired of it." The creature took a step closer, but its aggressive posture had shifted slightly. The crowd sensed the change and began to murmur in confusion. This wasn't following the usual script. "My people have a saying," Marcus said, raising his sword not in threat but in salute. "The enemy of my enemy is my friend. These aliens think they own us both. They think they can use us for their twisted games. But what if we showed them what happens when predators decide to hunt their real prey?" For a long moment, the arena was silent except for the confused murmuring of the crowd. The Shadow Maw stared at Marcus with those glowing white eyes, and Marcus stared back without fear. It was a moment of understanding between two intelligent beings who had been reduced to entertainment for a decadent civilization. Then something incredible happened. The Shadow Maw lowered its massive head in what could only be described as a bow. The crowd erupted in confusion and anger. This wasn't what they had paid to see. Vexitar was on his feet in the royal box, shouting orders at his staff. Energy barriers began to descend around the arena as security forces mobilized. But it was too late. Marcus had done something that no Zephyrian had thought possible. He had communicated with one of their monsters, and worse, he had gained its respect. As alarm klaxons began to wail throughout the arena, Marcus climbed onto the Shadow Maw's back, and together they prepared to show the Zephyrians what real predators could do. The revolution had begun, and it would start with the destruction of everything the Zephyrians held dear. Their perfect, orderly society was about to learn why humans had survived every challenge their homeworld had thrown at them. The prey had become the hunters, and the hunt was just beginning. Above them, the crowd screamed in panic as the energy barriers sparked and failed. The Shadow Maw roared, not in rage, but in freedom. And Marcus smiled grimly as he raised his pathetic sword toward the royal box, where Vextar stood frozen in shock. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity's greatest weapon had never been their technology or their numbers. It was their ability to turn any enemy into an ally, any monster into a friend, and any hopeless situation into an opportunity for victory. The real show was about to begin. The energy barriers around the arena flickered and died as the Shadow Maw's roar shattered the crystal control nodes embedded in the arena walls. Marcus had seen the creatures in the other cells during his walk through the tunnels, and he knew they were all waiting for a chance like this. The Zephyrians had made a critical error in their arrogance. They had assumed their prisoners would never work together. "Can you understand my words?" Marcus asked the Shadow Maw as chaos erupted around them. The creature turned one massive eye toward him and made a sound that was almost like speech. It was trying to communicate in its own language. Marcus placed his hand on the creature's neck, feeling the rumble of its voice through his palm. There was intelligence there, deep and ancient. The Shadow Maw wasn't just a predator. It was a thinking being that had been enslaved and forced to kill for entertainment. The rage it felt toward its captors was as strong as Marcus's own. "Show me where they keep the others," Marcus said, pointing toward the tunnel entrances around the arena's perimeter. The Shadow Maw understood immediately and began moving toward the largest opening, the one that led to the creature pens. The crowd was in full panic now. Zephyrians were streaming toward the exits, their musical voices rising in discord as they trampled each other in their haste to escape. But Vextar's security forces were already moving into position. Armed guards in powered armor began rappelling into the arena from hovering platforms, their energy weapons charging with an ominous whine. The first blast of plasma energy struck the sand where Marcus and the Shadow Maw had been standing moments before, turning it into glass. But the creature was already in motion, its 6 legs carrying them across the arena floor with incredible speed. Marcus held on as they reached the tunnel entrance, and the Shadow Maw smashed through the reinforced gate like it was made of paper. Inside the tunnels, the other imprisoned creatures heard the commotion and began to stir. There were dozens of them, beings from across the galaxy who had been captured and brought here to die for Zephyrian entertainment. Some were massive predators like the Shadow Maw, while others were smaller but no less dangerous. All of them had the same look in their eyes, rage at their captivity and hunger for revenge. Marcus jumped down from the Shadow Maw's back and began examining the cell locks. They were energy-based, designed to contain creatures that could tear through steel. But Marcus had worked with similar technology on the mining station. Every lock had a weakness, and these were no different. "The power coupling," he muttered, tracing the energy conduits with his finger. "If I can overload the central control unit." The sound of approaching boots echoed through the tunnel. The security forces had followed them into the creature pens, and they wouldn't be far behind. Marcus needed to work faster. He found what he was looking for, a maintenance panel that controlled the entire cell block. The Zephyrian writing was incomprehensible, but the circuitry was similar to human technology. Marcus pulled off his damaged helmet and used it to smash the panel open, revealing the delicate components inside. "This might hurt," he warned the Shadow Maw, then jammed his rusty sword into the power coupling. The explosion of feedback energy was spectacular. Every cell lock in the entire complex overloaded simultaneously, and the tunnel filled with the sound of opening doors. But Marcus barely noticed because he was too busy convulsing, as electricity coursed through his body via the sword's metal handle. When the electrical discharge finally stopped, Marcus collapsed to his knees, smoke rising from his armor. But around him he could hear the sounds of freedom, roars, growls, and alien battle cries as dozens of imprisoned creatures emerged from their cells. The first security squad rounded the corner just as a massive six-armed creature that looked like a cross between a bear and an octopus smashed into their formation. The Zephyrian Guard's plasma weapons were effective, but they had been designed to fight individual targets, not a coordinated assault by multiple apex predators. Marcus struggled to his feet, his muscles still twitching from the electrical shock. The Shadow Maw moved protectively in front of him as more creatures poured out of their cells. But these weren't mindless beasts attacking random targets. They seemed to understand that Marcus was responsible for their freedom, and they looked to him for guidance. "The control room," Marcus said, pointing up toward the ceiling. "We need to take the control room and release any other prisoners in the complex." The creatures didn't understand his words, but they understood his intent. The Shadow Maw let out a series of complex vocalizations, and the other beings responded with their own sounds. They were communicating, sharing information, and coordinating their actions. Marcus realized that many of these creatures were from species with advanced intelligence. They had been captured not because they were animals, but because they were sentient beings from worlds that the Zephyrians had conquered. The group moved through the tunnels like a pack of hunters. The smaller, faster creatures scouted ahead while the larger ones cleared any obstacles. Marcus found himself riding the Shadow Maw again as they navigated the complex, and he began to understand the layout of the facility. It was larger than he had initially thought. This wasn't just an arena. It was an entire entertainment complex with multiple fighting pits, creature pens, and holding areas. They encountered more security forces as they climbed toward the upper levels, but the Zephyrian Guards were no match for creatures that had been bred for combat and were now fighting for their freedom. The energy weapons that had once kept the prisoners in line were useless against opponents that attacked from multiple directions with coordination and intelligence. As they reached the main control center, Marcus saw something that made his blood boil. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see dozens of holding cells filled with beings from various species, including more humans. Men, women, and even children were imprisoned here, all destined for the arenas or worse fates. "We're getting them all out," Marcus said grimly, and the Shadow Maw rumbled its agreement. The control room was heavily defended, with automated turrets and a squad of elite guards in advanced power armor. But Marcus and his new allies had advantages that the Zephyrians hadn't counted on. They weren't just fighting. They were thinking, adapting, and using tactics that their captors couldn't predict. While the larger creatures drew the defenders' fire, smaller ones infiltrated the room through ventilation shafts and maintenance tunnels. The automated systems that had once seemed impregnable were designed to stop individual escape attempts, not a coordinated assault by multiple species working together. The battle for the control room was fierce but brief. When it was over, Marcus stood among the wreckage of Zephyrian technology, his hands on the master control panel that governed the entire facility. Around him, his new allies waited for his command. "Everyone goes free," he said, and began activating every cell lock in the complex. The response was immediate. Throughout the facility, alarms began blaring as hundreds of imprisoned beings were released from their cells. The sounds of liberation echoed through the corridors. Not just roars and growls, but voices speaking in dozens of languages as sentient beings tasted freedom for the first time in months or years. But Marcus knew this was just the beginning. The arena was only one facility among many, and Vextar's entertainment empire stretched across multiple worlds. Worse, The Zephyrian military would soon respond to the uprising with overwhelming force. They needed to move fast if they wanted to turn this jailbreak into something more permanent. Through the control room's windows, Marcus could see the city beyond. The crystalline spires of the Zephyrian capital stretched to the horizon, their surfaces gleaming in the alien sunlight. Somewhere out there were more prisons, more slaves, and more creatures like the Shadow Maw, who had been broken and forced to kill for the amusement of a decadent society. "Phase 1 is complete," Marcus said to the Shadow Maw. "Now comes the hard part. We're going to bring down their entire civilization." The creature looked at him with those glowing white eyes and made a sound that Marcus was beginning to recognize as laughter. The Shadow Maw understood exactly what Marcus was proposing, and it liked the idea very much. Outside, sirens wailed as Zephyrian emergency services tried to contain the chaos. But it was too late for containment. The revolution had begun, and it was spreading beyond the arena walls. Other imprisoned beings in the city were hearing the sounds of freedom and beginning to fight back against their captors. Marcus smiled grimly as he watched the first fires begin to burn in the Crystal City. The Zephyrians had made the mistake of underestimating not just humans, but every species they had enslaved. They had assumed that superior technology made them invulnerable, that their crystalline towers and energy weapons would always protect them from the primitive beings they oppressed. They were about to learn how wrong they had been. The prey had become predators, and the hunt for justice was just beginning. The galaxy would remember this day as the moment when the age of Zephyrian supremacy began to crumble, brought down not by another advanced civilization, but by a single human who had refused to accept that his story was supposed to end in an arena for alien entertainment. 3 months after the arena uprising, the revolution had spread across half the galaxy. What had started as a prison break had become something much larger, a coordinated rebellion of every species that the Zephyrian Empire had enslaved or oppressed. And at the center of it all was Marcus Chen, the human cargo handler who had somehow become the symbol of resistance against an empire that had stood for 1,000 years. Marcus stood on the bridge of the captured Zephyrian dreadnought Harmony's Edge, looking out at the fleet that had assembled around him. The ships were a patchwork collection of stolen Zephyrian vessels, converted cargo haulers, and warships from a dozen different civilizations. They weren't pretty, and they certainly weren't uniform, but they were united in purpose. The Shadow Maw lay curled on the bridge beside Marcus's command chair, its massive form somehow fitting into the space despite its size. The creature had become Marcus's constant companion and advisor, and its ability to communicate with other predator species had proven invaluable in coordinating the rebellion. Through the Shadow Maw, Marcus had learned that the arena creatures weren't random monsters. They were representatives of some of the most dangerous and intelligent species in the galaxy, captured specifically because they posed a threat to Zephyrian expansion. "Status report," Marcus said to the mixed crew of humans and aliens who now served as his staff. "The Liberation Fleet is ready," reported Commander Sarah Mitchell, a former colonial marine who had been captured during the raid on Kepler 442b. 37 ships, with representatives from 15 different species. The Korthax heavy cruisers are loaded with the freed arena creatures, and the Millennial Falcon's stealth ships are running reconnaissance on the target. Marcus nodded. Today, they would strike at the heart of the Zephyrian Empire, the capital world itself. But this wouldn't be a conventional assault. They had learned too much about their enemy's psychology to waste lives in a direct confrontation. "And our special cargo?" Marcus asked. "Locked and loaded," Sarah grinned, "though I still think you're completely insane." The special cargo was the key to Marcus's plan. During their liberation of other arena facilities, they had discovered something that changed everything they thought they knew about the Zephyrian Empire. Deep in the archives of a research station, they had found records of the Zephyrians' greatest shame, their own origins, The Zephyrians hadn't always been the crystalline-skinned overlords they pretended to be. 1,000,000 years ago, they had been something else entirely. A primitive species that had been enslaved by another empire, forced to fight in their own version of the dragon arenas. They had eventually overthrown their oppressors, but instead of learning from the experience, they had simply taken their place as the galaxy's tyrants. More importantly, the records revealed that the Zephyrians' current form was artificial. Their crystalline skin and musical voices were the result of genetic modification designed to make them appear more beautiful and refined to their former masters. Beneath the modifications, they were still the same primitive creatures they had always been, and they were terrified that someone would discover their secret. "Begin the broadcast," Marcus ordered. Across the Zephyrian Empire, every communication channel suddenly carried the same signal. It wasn't a message of conquest or demands for surrender. Instead, it was something far more devastating to the Zephyrian psyche: the truth about their own history. The broadcast showed the archived records in their entirety, including genetic analyses and historical documents that proved the Zephyrians' true origins. But more than that, it showed them what Marcus and his allies had discovered in the deepest levels of the research facilities. Living Zephyrians who had never been modified, descendants of the original species who had been kept hidden for generations. On Zephyr Prime, the reaction was immediate and catastrophic. The population that had built their entire identity around being superior to other species suddenly discovered that they were frauds. Riots broke out in the Crystal Cities as different factions turned on each other. Some demanded that the government explain the deception, while others insisted it had to be enemy propaganda. But the real shock came when Marcus's fleet arrived in the Zephyr system. Instead of attacking the planet's defenses, they simply positioned themselves in orbit and waited. Marcus had learned something important about psychological warfare. Sometimes the greatest victory came not from destroying your enemy, but from forcing them to face the truth about themselves. The Shadow Maw made a low rumbling sound, and Marcus placed his hand on the creature's neck. Through their bond, he could sense the other arena creatures throughout the fleet. They were eager for battle, hungry for revenge against their former captors. But Marcus had a different plan. "Open a channel to the planetary government," he ordered. Vextar himself appeared on the main screen. Though he looked nothing like the confident noble who had once owned the dragon arenas. His crystalline features were cracked and dim, and his musical voice was harsh with stress. "Human," Vextar said, spitting the word like a curse. "You have destroyed everything we built. Our empire, our civilization, our very identity. All lies now." "Not lies," Marcus corrected. "Just forgotten truths. Your people survived slavery and oppression once. They fought for their freedom and won. That's something to be proud of, not ashamed of." "Proud?" Vextar's laugh was bitter. "We became the very thing we once fought against. We enslaved others as we were enslaved. We turned into monsters." "Yes," Marcus said simply. "You did. But that doesn't mean you have to stay that way." On the bridge, Marcus's crew exchanged confused glances. They had been expecting demands for unconditional surrender, not what sounded like a therapy session with the enemy leader. "What do you want from us?" Vextar asked. "I want you to remember who you really are," Marcus replied. "Not the artificial beings your former masters created, but the people who fought for freedom and won. I want you to tear down the arenas, free the remaining prisoners, and start treating other species as equals instead of entertainment. And if we refuse," Marcus gestured to the fleet around him, "then we'll do it for you. But I'd rather you chose to do the right thing yourselves." For a long moment, the communication channel was silent. Behind Vextar, Marcus could see other Zephyrian officials arguing in their musical language. Some were clearly calling for a fight to the death, while others seemed to be considering Marcus's offer. Finally, Vextar spoke again. "You would trust us to reform ourselves, after everything we have done?" I trust you to be capable of growth, Marcus said. Every species is. Even humans had to learn that slavery and oppression were wrong. It took us centuries and a lot of bloodshed, but we figured it out eventually. I believe you can do the same. The Shadow Maw rumbled again, and Marcus sensed something through their connection. The creature was communicating with others of its kind throughout the galaxy, not just the arena survivors, but wild members of their species who had heard about the rebellion. They were offering something Marcus hadn't expected: forgiveness. The creatures you enslaved don't want revenge, Marcus said, interpreting the Shadow Maw's message. They want justice. They want the arenas closed and the prisoners freed. But they also want the chance for all our species to build something better together. "A alliance?" Vextar asked, disbelief clear in his voice. "Between equals? Why not? You have technology we could use. We have perspectives and abilities you lack. The creatures you kept as gladiators are some of the most intelligent and capable beings in the galaxy. Together, we could explore the unknown regions, establish new colonies, maybe even find those ancient masters of yours and settle some old scores." For the first time since the broadcast began, Vextar's crystalline features brightened slightly. The idea of confronting their former oppressors clearly appealed to the Zephyrian psyche. "It would not be easy," Vextar warned. "There are factions among my people who would rather die than admit our mistakes." "Then they can die," Marcus said bluntly. "But the rest of you can choose to live and build something better. The choice is yours." The negotiation that followed took 3 days. During that time, riots continued to rage across the Zephyrian Empire as the population struggled to come to terms with their true history. Some worlds declared independence from the central government, while others demanded a return to the old ways. But in the end, reason prevailed. The Zephyrian Council voted to accept Marcus's terms: the immediate closure of all arena facilities, the release of all prisoners, reparations to the affected species, and the establishment of a new galactic alliance based on equality rather than domination. The signing ceremony took place on the surface of Zephyr Prime, in the ruins of the original Dragon Arena where everything had started. Marcus stood beside representatives from dozens of species, including several of the creatures who had once been forced to fight for Zephyrian entertainment. The Shadow Maw was there too, its massive form dwarfing the other delegates. When Vextar approached to sign the treaty, the creature lowered its great head in what Marcus now recognized as a gesture of respect rather than submission. "I owe you an apology," Vextar said to the Shadow Maw, "for what I forced you to do, for the beings I made you kill. I cannot undo those actions, but I can promise they will never happen again." The Shadow Maw made a sound that was clearly a response, though Marcus was the only one present who could interpret it. "She says she forgives you," he translated, "but she also says that if you ever try to enslave anyone again, she'll personally hunt you across the galaxy and make you regret it." Vextar's crystalline features managed what might have been a smile. "I would expect nothing less." As the ceremony concluded and the various delegates began planning the new alliance, Marcus found himself standing alone with the Shadow Maw in the center of the old arena. The sand that had once been stained with blood was now covered with flowering vines planted by freed prisoners as a symbol of new growth. "Do you think it will work?" Marcus asked his companion. "This alliance of ours?" The Shadow Maw considered the question seriously, her glowing eyes studying the delegates as they socialized and shared ideas. Finally, she made a sound that Marcus had learned meant possibly. "I suppose that's the best we can hope for," Marcus said. "Humans, Zephyrians, and everyone else working together instead of trying to destroy each other. It's better than the alternative." As they walked out of the arena together, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since he was first thrown into this pit as entertainment for alien nobles. He had expected to die here, just another victim of Zephyrian cruelty. Instead, he had helped birth a new age of cooperation between species that had once seen each other only as enemies or prey. The galaxy was a big place, full of dangers and wonders yet to be discovered. But for the first time in history, its inhabitants would face those challenges together, as equals rather than conquerors and conquered. And if they were very lucky, the age of dragon arenas and slave markets would remain forever in the past, remembered only as a cautionary tale about what happened when civilization forgot that all intelligent beings deserved dignity and freedom. Marcus smiled as he climbed aboard his ship, ready to begin the next phase of their adventure. The universe was vast and full of possibilities, and they would explore it not as individual species competing for dominance, but as partners in the greatest expedition in galactic history. The prey had indeed become the predators, but they had chosen to hunt for knowledge and wonder rather than power and control. It was, Marcus thought, a much better story than the one that was supposed to have ended with his death in an arena built for alien entertainment.